Welcome to the Book Reading and Summaries channel.
Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Fyodor Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, first published in 1866, is a psychological, philosophical, and moral masterpiece that follows the tormented mind of Rodion Romanovich Raskolnikov, a former law student who commits a brutal double murder and then spirals into guilt, paranoia, and internal conflict as he struggles to justify his actions. The novel explores themes of morality, alienation, suffering, free will, redemption, and the eternal struggle between reason and conscience. Though it is framed as a crime story, the narrative moves far beyond the mechanics of murder to investigate the psychological and spiritual consequences of moral transgression. The following extended summary traces the novel's complex plot, characters, internal monologues, and philosophical layers in roughly 5,000 words. Raskolnikov's world, poverty, isolation, and the birth of a theory. The story unfolds in the oppressive, poverty-stricken streets of St. Petersburg, portrayed as suffocating, chaotic, and morally decaying. Raskolnikov, a young man in his early 20s, lives in extreme poverty, has quit his university studies due to lack of money, and spends most of his days in isolation in a tiny rented room. He suffers from fever, delusions, pride, and a deep sense of alienation from society. He often wanders restlessly through the filthy streets, lost in thought and tormented by a terrible idea that he is afraid even to name. The idea is this: certain extraordinary individuals, like Napoleon, have the moral right to commit crimes if their actions ultimately serve humanity or lead to the advancement of history. Raskolnikov has been developing this theory for months, convinced that great men break laws to accomplish greater good. To test this theory, he chooses as his victim Alyona Ivanovna, an old, cruel pawnbroker who exploits the poor for profit. In Raskolnikov's mind, killing her would serve a dual purpose. It would free the world of a useless, harmful louse, and it would provide him with money to continue his education and pursue noble goals. But Raskolnikov is deeply conflicted. He is at once repelled by the thought of murder and drawn to it by his fractured philosophy. His mind oscillates between cold calculation and emotional turmoil. He is haunted by dreams, especially a childhood memory in which he sees a mayor brutally beaten to death by a crowd of drunken men. The cruelty of the scene shakes him. He weeps as a boy and wakes with horror as an adult. The dream reveals a compassion buried under his intellectual pride and foreshadows the violence of his later actions. Despite these doubts, Raskolnikov continues to test himself by rehearsing the murder plan. Chance events, coincidences, and moments of hesitation create an atmosphere of fatalistic inevitability. He overhears a conversation suggesting the pawnbroker is widely hated and that murdering her would be a public service. These coincidences push his fragile mind toward action. 2. The murders, a crime of reason and a punishment of conscience. Driven by feverish excitement and dread, Raskolnikov executes the murder. On a hot July afternoon, he sneaks into Alyona's apartment with an axe hidden under his coat. He strikes her repeatedly. The murder is messier and more horrifying than he imagined. As he rummages through her belongings, the pawnbroker's gentle sister Lizaveta Ivanovna unexpectedly enters the room. In a panic, Raskolnikov kills her as well, something he never planned. This second murder marks the true moral rupture. Lizaveta is innocent and harmless. Raskolnikov's mind unravels. He barely escapes the building, hides the stolen items under a stone in a random courtyard, and collapses into delirium back in his room. His illness intensifies, blending fever with guilt, fear, and hallucinations. The extraordinary man theory that once energized him now torments him. Although he believes killing the pawnbroker was justified, Lizaveta's death shatters any moral logic he clung to. 3. The investigation begins, porphyry suspicion and mental torture. After the murders, Raskolnikov meets a web of characters who shape his journey toward confession. Razumikin, his loyal, optimistic friend Dmitri. Razumikin tries to help him, despite not understanding Raskolnikov's strange behavior. Razumikin represents rationality, warmth, and moral integrity, qualities Raskolnikov lacks in his tortured state. Pulcheria Alexandrovna and Dunya. Raskolnikov's mother, Pulcheria Alexandrovna, and his sister Avdotya Romanovna, Dunya, arrive in St. Petersburg. They bring news. Dunya is considering marrying Pyotr Petrovich Luzin, a pompous, calculating lawyer, who wants to marry her only to have a wife he can control. Raskolnikov violently opposes a marriage, revealing his pride and his possessiveness. Svidrigailov, another figure enters. Arkady Ivanovich Svidrigailov, a sinister former employer of Dunya, who has a dark reputation and mysterious motives. He becomes a disturbing mirror to Raskolnikov, a man of desire, manipulation, and depravity, but with moments of strange generosity. Porfiry Petrovich. The most psychologically important character is Porfiry Petrovich, the sharp-witted magistrate investigating the murders. Porfiry is intelligent, cunning, and deeply perceptive. Instead of direct interrogation, he uses psychological games, philosophical debates, and subtle traps to unsettle Raskolnikov. Their encounters are masterpieces of tension. Porfiry hints repeatedly that he suspects Raskolnikov but lacks proof. He says that a murderer often returns to the scene of the crime emotionally, if not physically, and that guilt reveals itself through behavior more than evidence. Raskolnikov becomes increasingly paranoid and unstable, convinced Porfiry is closing in. 4. Marmeladov, Sonia, and compassion in a cruel world. Another crucial storyline centers on Marmeladov, a tragic alcoholic civil servant whom Raskolnikov meets early in the novel. Marmeladov's life is in ruins. His addiction has destroyed his family, yet he speaks with poetic sorrow and spiritual longing. After his accidental death under a carriage, Raskolnikov impulsively gives the grieving family all his remaining money, a sign that his humanity has not been extinguished. Among Marmeladov's family is his daughter Sofia Semyonovna Marmeladova, or Sonia, one of the novel's most important characters. Sonia is gentle, devout, and self-sacrificing. Because of the family's extreme poverty, she has been forced into prostitution to support them, wearing a yellow ticket identifying her as part of society's lowest class. Despite her suffering, she retains an inner purity and spiritual strength. Unlike Raskolnikov, Sonia believes salvation comes through humility and faith, not superiority or intellect. Raskolnikov is drawn to her, as if to a spiritual opposite. He confesses his crime to Sonia, revealing the torment within him. Sonia responds not with horror, but with empathy and sorrow. She urges him to accept suffering, confess, and seek redemption. She becomes his moral compass, telling him, "Go at once. Stand at the crossroads, bow down, and say to the world, 'I am a murderer.'" Raskolnikov resists, torn between pride and guilt, but Sonia's compassion becomes a pivotal force in his transformation. V. Luzin's manipulation and Katerina Ivanovna's tragedy. More subplots intensify the moral complexity of the novel. Luzin's scheme. Luzin, humiliated by Raskolnikov's rejection of him as a suitor for Dunya, attempts to frame Sonia as a thief. He plants money in her pocket during a gathering and falsely accuses her. The scheme fails when witnesses expose Luzin's lies. Sonia's innocence, dignity, and vulnerability shine through the humiliation. Katerina Ivanovna, Marmeladov's wife. Katerina Ivanovna suffers from tuberculosis and mental instability. After Marmeladov's death, her condition worsens. In a tragic sequence, she forces Sonia's younger siblings to beg and tries to hold an improvised public parade to prove their nobility. Finally, she collapses and dies in despair. Sonia becomes guardian of the children, deepening her role as a figure of moral responsibility and compassion. 6. Svidrigailov, a dark mirror in the edge of despair. Svidrigailov becomes increasingly important as the novel progresses. Rumored to have committed various crimes, including possibly murdering his wife, he is morally ambiguous and unpredictable. He approaches Raskolnikov with hints that he knows about the murder. He also pursues Dunya obsessively. Svidrigailov embodies the idea of life without moral boundaries, an existence guided by pleasure, manipulation, and self-interest. Yet he sees through Raskolnikov's theory of the extraordinary man. He recognizes the emptiness beneath Raskolnikov's philosophical pride and, in a strange way, pushes him toward confession by reflecting the bleak consequences of living without conscience. In the most disturbing turn, Svidrigailov tries to seduce Dunya. She rejects him and even fires a gun at him. Recognizing the futility of his desires and the emptiness of his life, Svidrigailov commits suicide in the cold rain, a grim counterpart to Raskolnikov's possible fate. 7. Confrontation, confession, and the road to redemption. After Svidrigaïlov's death, Sonia's influence deepens. She gives Raskolnikov a cross that once belonged to Lizaveta, symbolizing acceptance of suffering and the path to spiritual rebirth. Raskolnikov wrestles with his pride. Part of him still clings to his theory, insisting he has done nothing wrong except miscalculate. But Sonia's example, the pressure from Porfiry, and the unbearable weight of guilt tear his defenses. Porfiry's final strategy. In their final meeting, Porfiry tells Raskolnikov he is certain of his guilt, even though he cannot prove it. Instead of arresting him, Porfiry urges him to confess voluntarily, arguing that confession will lead to spiritual healing. Porfiry demonstrates remarkable humanity, seeing in Raskolnikov a tortured young man rather than a monster. The confession. In one of the novel's most emotional scenes, Raskolnikov finally walks to the police station with Sonia silently following him at a distance. Inside, he does not confess immediately. His pride battles him until the last moment. But when he sees Sonia in the doorway, he collapses emotionally and admits to the murders. This is a turning point, the act that represents the beginning of his punishment, not its end. 8. Siberia. Punishment, suffering, and the rebirth of a soul. Raskolnikov is sentenced to 8 years of penal servitude in Siberia. Sonia moves to a village nearby and visits him often. Despite her loyalty, Raskolnikov initially remains emotionally closed. He feels resentment, believing he committed the murder as part of a philosophical experiment rather than a moral crime. His fellow convicts distrust him. They sense his arrogance and lack of remorse. However, over time, a profound transformation begins. During a severe fever, Raskolnikov dreams of a plague that spreads across the world, causing people to believe they are absolutely right while committing acts of senseless violence. The dream symbolizes the destructive consequences of unchecked pride and moral relativism, of believing oneself above the moral law. When he awakens, he sees Sonia at his bedside, still devoted despite everything. For the first time, Raskolnikov opens his heart to her. This moment marks the beginning of his spiritual resurrection. He understands that true freedom lies not in breaking laws or proving superiority, but in embracing humility, suffering, and compassionate love. The novel ends not with triumphant resolution, but with a quiet promise. Raskolnikov begins to read the New Testament Sonia has given him. His rebirth has only begun. 9. Themes and philosophical significance. Crime and Punishment is rich with themes that transcend its plot. The psychology of crime. Dostoevsky explores not the act itself, but the mental turmoil that follows. Raskolnikov's punishment begins long before his arrest, within his mind. Moral law versus intellectual pride. The novel critiques philosophies that place individuals above universal moral law. Raskolnikov's theory collapses when confronted with human suffering, alienation, and poverty. St. Petersburg is depicted as a suffocating environment that shapes the psyche of its inhabitants. Poverty and desperation contribute to Raskolnikov's crime. Redemption through suffering. Dostoevsky suggests suffering can lead to spiritual purification. Sonia embodies this belief. The power of compassion. Sonia, Razumikin, Porfiry, and even Marmeladov show that empathy is the antidote to moral despair. X. Character summaries. Raskolnikov, intelligent, proud, tormented, torn between compassion and ego. Sonia, a symbol of spiritual purity and unconditional love. Porfiry, a psychological detective who understands the human soul. Dunya, strong, moral, independent. Razumikin, loyal friend, rational counterpart to Raskolnikov. Svidrigaïlov, dark reflection of a life without conscience. Luzin, a manipulative opportunist. Marmeladov and Katerina Ivanovna, portraits of suffering and social desperation. 11. Conclusion. Crime and Punishment is not simply a story about murder, detection, or legal retribution. It is a profound exploration of the human soul in conflict with itself. Through Raskolnikov's psychological journey, Dostoevsky examines the consequences of ideology, divorce from empathy, the torment of guilt, and the possibility of redemption through love and suffering. The novel ends not with finality but with rebirth, suggesting that transformation is an ongoing, painful, yet hopeful process.
Subscribe to the channel to motivate us to create more useful videos.